When is it all going to stop? When will enough be enough? Welcome to Rising Crime. Now, if you follow this channel at all, I mostly talk about homicides. And I talk about the homicides mainly because those are the one thing that you can't come back from. Now, I know a lot of things that happen to people, they never get back mentally to who they were prior to that, but they're still here. So I don't normally cover things like carjackings that we're going to cover today. Once this year, I've covered carjackings. But I don't normally cover carjackings. But the other night, I heard about Brian Robinson, the running back for the NFL team formerly known as the Washington Redskins. And he had been a victim of carjacking where he was shot in the leg twice. And the first thing I thought after I knew he was okay, they had said almost right away it was non-life threatening and he was going to be okay. And the first thing I thought after that was, maybe he'll be the one that makes the change. The NFL is very powerful. Very powerful. They're a big company and they have a lot of power. And when you think about the crime that we have, something has to happen to somebody that somebody cares about. Somebody of importance that somebody cares about. Because all this stuff keeps happening to just us regular people and nobody cares. Nobody does anything about it. But somebody that somebody important cares about, they might do something about it. And so I started thinking about him and I thought, most people probably don't know who he is. If you said the name Brian Robinson, most people wouldn't know who he was. Unless you live in Washington, D.C., or unless you play fantasy football, which is the only reason I knew who he was. But he's a rookie, and I don't think that many people know about him. And he's not really all that important at this point to the NFL. He might be to the Redskins, but to the NFL in general, I don't think he is. So I started thinking, if not him, who? Who would something have to happen to make a change? Because we got places like Minneapolis, who I am just from now on calling the city that started it all. Because if you go back 2 years, on the night the riot started, if the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, if the governor of Minnesota would have sent in the National Guard that very first day, if he'd have stopped the riots that very first day and not let them go on for days and days and let people get their aggressions out or whatever the point of all that was, if he'd have stopped it the first day, we'd be in a totally different place right now. So Minneapolis, in my mind, is the city that started it all. And they will continue to be the city that started it all until it all ends, which isn't going to be for a long time. But I saw on the internet that the Minneapolis Police Department sent out letters to residents in 2 neighborhoods, the Ventura Village neighborhood and Midtown Phillips neighborhoods. They sent these out before last weekend, telling people that there's been an increase of crime in these areas, which the people probably already knew that, and telling them that the suspects have been armed and targeting victims who are sitting in their cars, approaching their cars, or on their phones. They told them the time of day, that they happen late afternoon to early evening hours. And they're saying that they installed mobile cameras at certain intersections that they think will help deter carjackings. And they're telling drivers, keep your car doors locked at all times, be vigilant, don't scroll through social media while parked in your car. And they're also to tell others where they are headed and keep driving if they think they're being followed. So they're not telling you that we're on top of this, that we got this, that we're going to catch these guys and we're going to put them away in jail so you don't have to worry about it. We're giving you a long list of things, a checklist to do every time you leave your house and every time you come home. You make sure you do these things to prevent that crime from happening to you. Because if you don't do these things, you may be a victim of this crime. And we're giving you fair warning. So they're letting people know that things are bad. They're not saying we're trying to fix it, though. They're bad. They're admitting to it. But there's nothing that the people are going to do. Nothing's going to make it any better other than you protecting yourself, keeping your car doors locked. So this is happening in the city that started it all. And carjackings are out of control everywhere. I could go on and on about carjackings. I'm not going to. You've heard, Philly, Chicago, all of them. But this is just the world we're living in right now. This is the 2020s. This is what the world is. There was a lady in D.C. who a kid came up and tried to mug her, and he had a gun. And there was video footage of it. And her instinct was, she was shocked at first. She dropped her bags and stuff. And her instinct was to kind of attack back at the guy. And she started yelling at him, "Shoot me, shoot me." And he's holding the gun at her, and she's yelling, "Shoot me," at him, like trying to get him to shoot her. And he eventually walked away. Now, this is probably not advised by police as something to do. They would tell you just hand over everything you have and walk away, and don't agitate the criminal. But her first instinct was to kind of go on the attack on this. And he left. And I have to imagine there's only a few reasons why he didn't just shoot her and take her stuff. One, it was his first time doing it, and he didn't expect her to respond that way, so he wasn't sure what to do. Two, he was using a fake gun, like a kid's gun or some gun that he couldn't actually shoot her with. Or three, the gun he had was not loaded. I do not believe in Washington, D.C., there is any other reason than those three reasons that some criminal who is willing to walk up and put a gun in your face isn't willing to use it unless he can't physically use it. Or unless you caught him enough off guard, he wasn't sure what to do. But that was in D.C., and you expect things like that in D.C. There was also a thing in Chicago where one car was chasing another car, and the guys in the second car that were following the first car, they were shooting at the car in front of them. So that the victim's car, they go to the 22nd precinct in Chicago, and they pull into the police parking lot. The guys are still shooting up the car, and they're shooting up the police building. They didn't even care that they were in front of a police building while they're just opening fire on this car. They just kept shooting anyway. Now, again, you kind of expect stuff like this to happen in Chicago because, well, Chicago's Chicago. So we also there was a guy in Detroit who, they're calling it a mass shooting because he killed 3 people with a gun and injured 1 other person. So technically it wasn't all in one location. He was kind of randomly like shooting people around town. And again, this is a city that you kind of expect this stuff to happen. You got some random shooter walking around and, it's Detroit, it's Chicago. But then you go someplace like Bend, Oregon, which is a smaller city, 84,000 people, that has a violent crime rate much better than the national average. Oregon as a state is much better than the national average. And Bend, Oregon is like almost twice as good as the state of Oregon as far as their safety numbers compared to the national average. But there was a gunman in Bend, Oregon that was walking around, just started randomly shooting. So apparently the gunman came from a shopping center parking lot, from a residential area behind the shopping center. He moved through the parking lot from the Costco on the west end, shooting rounds from an AR-15 style rifle, and then entered the west entrance of a Safeway grocery store. He shot 1 person at the entrance to the grocery store. That person was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. Inside the store, the shooter killed a 2nd person. When officers arrived, they heard gunshots from inside the store, but they found the suspected gunman dead inside with the AR-15 style rifle lying next to him and a shotgun nearby. But Bend, Oregon, you know, when you hear about all these crimes that happen in cities where the people say, "Oh, that kind of stuff just doesn't happen here." Well, this is really one of those cities that kind of stuff just doesn't happen to. But it does now. 2020s, 2022, I imagine for a good chunk of this decade, they're going to be talking about it like they did in the 90s. There is no city that just doesn't happen to anymore. There is no place in our country where you can say that just doesn't happen here, because it happens everywhere. I followed these mass shootings, and I read all these news articles and watch all these news clips on people that have been victims, and they happen literally everywhere. There was this lady in Bogalusa. I just did this story the other day. This lady in Bogalusa, Louisiana. She was getting her hair done or something. She's sitting in a chair inside a house, and someone opened fire, a drive-by, on the house. And she was just sitting in the wrong spot. The bullet hit her right in the head. And I looked up the stats on Bogalusa because I was just curious. And their murder rate was 140. Chicago, the same year, was 18.2. Bogalusa, 140. Chicago, 18.2. And then I started looking at a few other cities in Louisiana. And Louisiana has a lot of cities with really high murder rates. Murder rates that would make Chicago look like an Eden, where you'd want to go and you'd want to bring your family and you'd want to raise your kids. That's how bad some of these cities in Louisiana are as far as murders go. And I did a video actually a few weeks ago that Louisiana has been considered the most dangerous state in the United States for 32 years straight. And that only went up to 2020. So I'm assuming that nothing had changed last year, and it's 33 years straight. And come the end of this year, they'll likely still be at 34 years straight, because New Orleans 1 is really bad now. But you have all these small towns and cities that have population of like 12,000 that are seeing high murder rates. And they're towns, basically, a lot of them that are small enough that you know pretty much everybody in the town if you've lived there long enough. And those kind of cities shouldn't have murder rates as high as they do, but the murder rates are just out of control. And you're seeing that all over our country. So bringing it all back to where I started, what is going to make all this stop? Who is going to have to be affected by this that has the power to make it stop? Because nobody's trying to make it stop. It's almost like they don't care that it's happening, or they have some weird agenda that this is actually what they want to happen. I mean, I started thinking about it, and I'm like, you got Joe Biden and his son Hunter. If something happened to Hunter, I don't think that would stop anything. If he was murdered by somebody, some random person on the street, I don't think that would be enough. And he's the president of the United States. So I don't think, even if his own son, something happened to him, I don't think that would be enough to make changes in our country. But something has to happen somebody has to be affected by this that's in a position of authority. And I don't know where you go above the president of the United States, unless it has to affect a large swath of people that are in charge, directly affect them personally in their personal lives, the way it affects everybody else in our country. Because they're not seeing it, they're not feeling the effects of it, and they don't care. And I don't know. Maybe somebody's got an idea. And maybe I'm way off base on this. Like, maybe it's not going to take somebody having it affect them the way it affects us. Maybe it takes something else even bigger or broader or beyond that. But at some point, something has to change, because we can't keep going through life just being like, well, at least that's not my neighborhood. When it comes to some of these neighborhoods, people are like, yeah, well, it doesn't happen in my neighborhood. Where I live in a safe area that there are surrounding areas that aren't so safe. And I have to drive through these not so safe areas to get to my house. But where my house is completely safe. I had a friend over last week or the week before, and she's asking me, why do you live here? And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with my neighborhood. My neighborhood's completely fine. She's like, yeah, but you got to go through all that just to get to your neighborhood. And I'm like, true, depending on which direction you're coming from. I live here, so my perspective on it is completely different than somebody who comes in from the suburbs and takes a look at it. Somebody from the suburbs, like a different friend of mine, she was complaining that there was somebody holding a sign on the street corner asking for money in her neighborhood. And I was like, are you kidding me? If that's the worst problem you have in your neighborhood, is somebody trying to panhandle? And I think it all comes down to your perspective on things when it comes to crime and where you live. And I live in a place that where I physically live is completely safe, or I feel safe here. It's not safe like you go way out in the suburbs or something. It's not safe like that, but even the suburbs aren't really all that safe anymore. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But my perspective on it is it's safer than the areas around me, which are questionable at best. I mean, they're not bad. I'm not afraid of getting murdered or whatever, but if I got robbed, I wouldn't be surprised. If I got carjacked, I wouldn't be surprised. If I got hit by a stray bullet, I probably wouldn't be surprised in that area. Not where I live, but where I have to travel through to get to my house. So your perspective on what's safe and what is not safe is totally dependent on, I guess, where you live and what you've experienced in your life. But if things continue the way they are, this is eventually going to affect everybody, regardless of where you live. Because right now, I seriously don't think there's any place you can go that's completely safe. There's places safer than others, obviously. But I almost feel like where I live, where I have to go through where I see where it's bad, even though where I'm physically at when I go to sleep is safe, I see what's bad, so it keeps me on higher alert. And I think when things hit the suburbs, people they're more shocked by it because they're not expecting it. Where I don't expect it to happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did. I have this thing that I say all the time when people are talking about something to give them perspective on things. If you're ever in rush hour traffic and you're sitting there and you're going like 5 miles an hour and you're moving and you're moving and you're moving and you're saying to yourself, at least we're moving forward. I'm progressing forward. We're getting there. We're moving forward. It's slow, but we're getting there. And then you look over to the other side and everyone's flying the other direction and they're going 60 miles an hour. The people driving the 60 miles an hour are looking over at the side that's in the slow traffic and they're saying, glad I'm not over there. But when you're in the traffic, when you're in the rush hour traffic, you're saying to yourself, it's moving forward. I'm slowly getting there, but I'm moving forward. And it's a complete different perspective when you see it from the other side. And I guess crime's the same way. Somebody that grows up in the hood, they see crime completely differently than someone that grows up in a suburb or out in the middle of farmland or something. Well, that's all I got for you today. So stay safe, America. Keep your head on a swivel. And remember, a bullet can travel over a mile unimpeded. So keep dodging those strays until these shooters get better aim. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.